Yeah, welcome everybody. Some of you you've been on several of these with us before, so you kind of know the format, but what we typically do is spend a few minutes with our guests and hear from them. And so we're really blessed and honored to have Roy, and we'll introduce him in a second. At the end, we'll answer questions, and you can begin placing those questions at any time during this in the Q&A part on the bottom of your screen there. And so drop those questions in there. Some of them we may answer in real time, but most of them we'll try to hit at the end with Roy.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for joining this webinar. And we're going to be talking with Roy about viruses that will kill disciple-making movements. Just to give you a little bit of background on Roy, and this is really hard to do because he's so multifaceted. I mean, he's involved in so many things, but he is the director for North America with New Generations, also the pastor of Shoal Creek Community Church, and has written several books. One of those is called Spent Matches, and another is The Hybrid Church, which really describes what he's doing with his own church in Kansas City. But Roy has a tremendous heart to see movements happen in North America and has a lot of experience with just movement leaders in various countries throughout the world. And so, yeah, it's good to have Roy on. Before Roy shares, I asked Josh, what is one word that you can think of that would describe Roy Moran?
I couldn't decide between saint and Shekinah.
So I would say, again, multifaceted. I mean, Roy is able to do 101 things at the same time, and he's got so much going on. Maybe like I could say you're like the ultimate plate spinner, Roy.
I could be, that's true.
And you say that you function best when you have a lot of things going on. I've heard people say that about you. But yeah.
That's true.
So
live with me.
Yeah, well, Roy, again, good to have you on. And if you ever visit Kansas City, make sure you stop by and say hello to Roy. He'll treat you to some great barbecue.
Yes, sir.
Anyhow, yeah, Roy's going to be talking about just some of the killers to disciple-making movements. And I feel like this is really applicable to us in North America. We see these things happening overseas that kill movements, but in many ways, I feel like there are things that really hinder even movements from starting here in North America. And so I'm going to just mention these. I've heard Roy talk about these on a number of occasions. He's written about them. And the first one is called exceptionalism. These are big words. Roy is also a guy that has incredible vocabulary. You'll find when you're with him that you got to take like a dictionary with you to define some of the words that he comes up with, just to know if they're really words. But the first word is exceptionalism. And Roy, do you want to just talk about how this kills movements?
Sure. Yeah, one time, it's something you don't want to be known for necessarily, but walking out of a service, and I was at a church where they practiced that glorification of the worm process, where you stand at the door and people shake your hand and lie to you, tell you, great sermon, Pastor. This lady says to me, you know what? I love hearing you speak. And of course, your ears go up and you perk up and you think, oh, wow, I can't wait. What's this going to bless my soul? She goes, I learn a new word every time I hear you. So I thought, geez, God gave me gifts to be a vocabulary builder. That wasn't exactly what I dreamed about in my life, but I think exceptionalism, there's a tendency for us to really want to depend in the movement world and really in all of Christianity. It's a virus that comes straight from the traditional modern Christianity. That is these exceptional people. I mean, it's the reason we have mega churches, because we have these exceptional leaders or speakers. They can really garner a crowd and create some great religious entertainment every Sunday, and people go home, feel blessed, and that's the extent of their walk with God is really about them. That's one place it exists. It leaks into movement when we start looking for exceptional people. And the movements are built on methodologies and really mindsets that are focused on ordinary people doing extraordinary things. When we first started here at Shoal Creek, I got this email from a kindergarten teacher who had gone through our initial training. And in it, she expressed to me, now, I don't want to paint kindergarten teachers, in some type of corner, but this gal was extremely faithful, extremely loving. She was made to be a kindergarten teacher in that sense. But if you lined up 10 people in a room and you said, pick 3 leaders here to start your movement, she would not be one of the 3 you would pick. But unfortunately, that mindset, pervades, and yet she just, said to me, this is the first time in my life I feel like I've been given a chance to play, that I have a place in the game now. And she did. She invited 6 of her coworkers into a discovery group. She quickly understood innately, without really any coaching, that 3 of those were believers, 3 were non-believers. She started 2 groups. She let the believing folks go off. She taught them how to do discovery and left them alone and let them die. And then she worked with the non-believers, and she was able to see them come to faith and multiply. The husband of one of those co-workers got interested and joined the group. And so if I were acting in my mindset that I was trained and I grew up in, I would have never picked her to do anything. She would have been a follower, not an initiator. And as a result, my mindset would have killed movement because I just wouldn't have chosen her. So it's that kind of, thing that exists, and it, it's reinforced in our entire culture as we look around and see, in terms of sports teams, we don't pick the worst player, we pick the best player, and all of those types of metaphors that exist in our world. We don't read books, about really failing business leaders. We read books about successful business leaders. We don't go to conferences and hear things about people's failure. We go to conferences to hear people's successes. And so we raise up these exceptional people. And as a result, it bleeds into the everyday decisions that we make in the movement world about investing time, energy, and effort, into ordinary people. And also really focusing in on our methodologies to make sure that ordinary people can be able to pull those methodologies off, and they're replicatable in just about any. It doesn't take any gifts or passions or abilities or skills or knowledge or anything. Our methodologies are repeatable, despite someone's what they possess. I think it's dangerous, for instance. Right now, the word micro church is a big word, and we see, in the micro church movement, it's connected to a lot of the APEST stuff, and I think there's a dangerous mentality in that, of looking at that, release the apes and all this kind of stuff, and it's like it's really echoes of exceptionalism in a sense, and the fact is that the movements around the world are not built by form, but they're built by function. They're built by ordinary people doing everyday tasks like leading discovery groups and seeing people come to faith, and letting those discovery groups move into churches, and letting those churches continue to multiply either through discovery groups or immediately into another church. And it's done, not with a focus on releasing the apes, not with a focus on, a 5-fold gifting or anything like that. It's done because people are growing in their obedience to Jesus, and they're responding to Jesus's teachings, and they're fulfilling that, and they're not held back by what they possess or they don't possess in terms of a gifting or a skill or, their ability to speak, or even the vocabulary, all that kind of stuff. It's just, making sure that the frictions that we create, that are cultural in nature, not biblical, are removed and extinguished. And that's, that's a virus. That's what what gets in unseen. No one saw COVID when it left China and moved all around the world. We didn't see it, but all of a sudden it erupted and affected all of us in a global fashion. And I think you have to keep your mindset, focused on, what viruses am I allowing to leak into this? And it's why, disciple making is a team sport. It's why authenticity really needs to be a part of every team, so that we're constantly questioning ourselves, and asking of all the new ideas that we come up with, is this replicatable? Will it repeat itself in ordinary people?
Yeah, I just wanted to, somebody had asked, what do you mean by releasing the apes? And of course you were talking about APES. Some people call that the fivefold ministry.
Apostles, prophets, evangelists. Yeah. So there's some that say that, what's wrong with the church is that we've kept them caged, and we need to release the apostles, prophets, and evangelists. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I think if it can be stymieing in movement if that's what we're
if it leads to exceptionalism, like you point out, absolutely. So that goes to the next question, right, David?
Yeah, but I wanted to just mention one thing. I mean, do you feel like it's helpful to focus on maybe the early adopters? Sometimes we call them like the releasing the radicals is another way maybe of describing that. Would you maybe speak into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's really important. When you think about Everett Rogers' diffusions of innovation research that came out of the agricultural world that has spread all over and been validated in so many different social settings, that first 16% of people, the innovators and early adopters, are the ones that have or hear the language of scarcity. So if you go to Amazon and you look up spent matches and you read the reviews, you'll find a review there that says, and I forget the number they gave, maybe a 1 or something, and it says, the Church of Jesus Christ is not failing because Jesus can't fail, and it's like someone who read the first chapter in Spent Matches, which is just all about how we're not getting the job done with the methodologies that we've chosen. Jesus didn't choose for us to meet on Sunday in buildings at 9:30 and 11 and that kind of stuff. That's not a biblical thing. We've chosen that. It's grown out of our Western culture. And so when people hear that strategy is not working, they get offended. Well, that they belong in the late adopters and that 84% that only really move when they see social proof. That is, it's like they're all from Missouri on that side. They're the show me people. Missouri, we're the show me state. So it's like they got to see it to believe it. The early adopters are people that can move on aspiration. They can move on a virtual idea of something, and they want to change. They just have this desire to get involved in. And I don't think that that's necessarily equivalent to an apostle or a prophet or evangelist or anything like that. This young gal I mentioned as a kindergarten teacher was eager to move. I mean, she was eager to be an impactful follower of Jesus where she lived, learned, worked, or played. And so she really wanted, to do something. And she was an early adopter in that sense. But, if I use my American kind of mindset, I might not have picked her out as an early adopter. So that's why you had to plant seeds and question your filters really quickly, as you do that. But it's really important that you do understand, the tipping point issues, and don't try to argue the 84% of the people into some type of strategy or tactic that they're not going until you have proof. So leave them alone. Don't get into fights with them. Leave them alone. Find the radicals. Find the people that have that holy discontent, that kind of secretly have always said to themselves, "Wow, if this is what Jesus intended, we're missing something." Or they've got that kind of thought, and you make that legal. You create a space where you can make that kind of thinking legal, and you'll be surprised how many people think like that. And as long as you're not against something, you're not trying to tear down something, you're just trying to start something new, something different. I think that's the real key, in that process of finding that innovator and early adopter crowd.
Yeah, awesome. All right. The second virus would be professionalism. And I've heard it said, I think you said it before, that a trained outsider is less effective than an untrained insider.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think, your story, David, with your friends exhibits that, is that you saw some, a couple come to faith, and they, went some spaces in places where you couldn't go, and as a result of that, we have to realize is that, Jesus practiced that principle so often, in terms of relating to people when he healed the Gadarene demoniac, and you would think he would let him get in the boat, sit at the feet of Jesus and really learn, and, learn the 5 fundamentals of the faith, learn the 10 basic principles of the Christian life, learn, how to do a quiet time, learn how to, pray, learn how, all that kind of stuff. And then Jesus would have released him to go back, into the Decapolis area and spread the gospel. But that didn't happen. Jesus just said, go back and tell them what had happened. He released them immediately. And I think we have, we have embraced our, we've crossed the line into, so let's say the line is infinite and finite. Okay. So this line, God is infinite. He's limitless. And with everything, and we're finite, we aren't. And yet somehow we think in our finiteness, we have the ability to be able to identify and ordain orthodoxy. We have subject matter experts that really are in control. And when you achieve a certain level of knowledge or whatever, based on some subject matter expert's judgment, then you can go. And the reality is that that's just not a sense of trust, in the fact that this is a spiritual battle. It's not an academic battle. This is a spiritual battle, and we have for so long not been willing to lean into that. In the fact that we don't believe in a dual God. We believe in a triunity. There is a spirit that is at work in this world, even though this world is Satan's world. And so our inability to trust the spirit and the power of the word of God together in the lives of ordinary people cause us to want to rise up in our finiteness and say, okay, you're qualified. You have reached certain level of knowledge or practice or whatever, you're qualified. And that's just a stymieing thought, and that's not a new thought, that thought was around, that was part of what started my journey reading I'm forgetting the book now, Rapid Expansion of the Church. That's not the right word. Help me, Josh, here.
Miraculous movement. I don't know.
No. It's way older than that. 1900s. A Methodist missionary. I'll think of his name in a minute. Someone out there will know. Someone can put it in the chat or something. But the Spontaneous Expansion of the Church and Its Hindrances. There's the name of the book. And he was identifying that, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, saying that we don't have enough money to build enough schools and hospitals. And that was the preferred strategy of moving the gospel around the world at that time. We don't have enough money to do that. And then he also identified the fact that the way we train people, we pluck them out of their context, we bring them to Europe, we put them in European institutions and training, and then we want them to go back. And they're so unqualified by the time they get back to work in their own cultures, that we're killing ourselves. And so this idea of professionals, Jesus developed people on the job in real time, and real-time coaching and high relational connection.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty, of what Jesus is doing, in the beauty of transferring, these values because they're seen, they're taught, they're caught, they're seen, heard type thing. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with, ordination or certification or qualification or all that kind of stuff, unless it reduces the movement of the gospel.
Yeah.
And when it reduces the rapidity of which the gospel can move, then it becomes a tool of Satan rather than a tool of the kingdom.
Yeah, I remember reading so much about that with the Methodist movement. I mean, you have a movement that was just ordinary people, and then when it began to have the laity and the professionals, the whole thing just began to die, because it had this idea that the professionals are the ones that are qualified to do ministry. Yeah, that's helpful. The next one is mechanicalism. I like these big words, Roy, that you came up with.
Well, when they ask
is that even a word? I think we should.
It is now. It's George W. Bush could make up words, so can Roy Moran.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to mention to everybody before Roy jumps into mechanicalism that you can start leaving questions in the Q&A at any time, and we'll get to those here in just a few minutes. So feel free to do that. Roy, what's mechanicalism?
Well, I do think we are so desperate to succeed. I think a balanced view of what's happening in North America, would help us see that we're failing. We're far behind. And I heard on a news report yesterday, there's some folks who are kind of coming out against Christianity, saying that the Taliban, equating the Taliban with Christianity, and just saying that the Taliban is not doing anything that Christians haven't done, and blah, 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 that kind of stuff. And so the news reporters were saying that 80 to 90 million Americans identify as evangelicals. And they may identify with whatever they identify with. That's fine. I had a lawyer friend the other day, tell me that his work, his law firm was requiring him to be vaccinated, and he was concerned about vaccination because of some of his own health issues. And he said, "So I'm just going to identify as vaccinated." So it's like, okay, there's one thing of what you identify with, but when we look at some of the hardcore research, and you start collapsing some of these things down, you see that only about 10%, maybe 9% of Americans really do have the kind of relationship with a father that will get them from this world to the next. And so, all of the money, we have all the wealth in the world. And as a result of that, we've got more technology, we've got more money, we've got more talented people than we've ever had, all that kind of stuff going into the movement of the gospel in the West, and we're still falling behind, and slowly moving toward that unreached people group status if we keep it up. So I think that we're so desperate for success that we grab at anything. So we hear stories from Bushpori. We read books like Miraculous Movements, and we see these things in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we turn to the appendix and we look at the mechanics of what we think got them there, and we adopt those things. And we believe that if we do what they did, that the same thing will happen here. And the reality is that when you talk to David Watson or Shdanke or Isla or Aichi or Nusser or Harry Brown, any of those guys, you talk to people who are fundamentally, just in the midst of this miraculous stuff that's going on, you discover that it's not mechanical by any means. Mm-hmm. It is highly spiritual. It begins with this heart for the Father's family, to gather his family. It begins with this real desire to put the Father's heart in my eyes and to see the world as he sees it. It's about, loving people. It's about helping people discover the favor of their Father who desperately wants them to be in his family. And it's a spiritual thing. It's not a mechanical thing. It's not just go out and start a bunch of discovery Bible studies and get enough of them going, and movement happens. It's far from that, in that sense. And it's really about trusting and leaning into the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and beginning to really have a posture of obedience, and a posture of submission to do the Father's will in this world. And that just soaks everything, about this. And so if you just come up on and you read, I forget what it is in Miraculous, Appendix 2 or something, and you see the discovery questions there, and you think, I'm just going to do what they did. And what's going to happen is what happened there. And the reality is that you probably need to ask yourself, who are they as people? You need to be before you do, in that sense. And so you come with this posture of submission to God, and this posture of submission to kingdom, and realize that the Father is about, bringing heaven to earth. That is his one of the primary requests in the prayer that he taught us to pray. And so we need to be about, the Father's business in this world. And what is that? And so that postures us toward, the not yet brothers and sisters who the Father is drawing into his family. And then the methodologies are secondary, to it. There are ways of going about it. And it's why, different movement tactics work in different places in the world, because of the posture that people have, toward that particular, target audience that they're attempting to plant the gospel in. So it's not just, learn some things. And I've watched this happen in especially in American churches, where people get intoxicated on things like DBS, and it says like DBS, and they used to do a lot of, they're doing, just tons. And we had stories that flare up like, oh, here's the breakthrough, this church, in this particular place is having a breakthrough because they've got 1,000 DBSs and that kind of stuff. And it's like, really? And you dig into it, and it's not really necessarily true. They had maybe 1,000 repetitions of people doing, discovery with different, friends and neighbors and workmates and that kind of stuff, but mostly not in the non-believing world and that kind of stuff. So it's just not mechanical. That's why you'll find most movement catalysts will talk about, movement starts with prayer. They want to emphasize, that, because we as Westerners are so mechanical. We're looking for the methods to make this happen. And first we got to figure out, how do we be the people that make this happen? How do we ourselves first, come into a really significant union with the Father, and so that our movements into this world are really, according to him, not just trying to do some kind of methodology and stuff.
Yeah. What are ways that you would say can help us get to that place, Roy, where we truly have the Father's heart for the lost? We're truly relying on the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I think rethinking the gospel could be really helpful here. I'm going to get heretical here, but rethinking, we have, at least I'll speak for myself. I came to faith in a kind of a 4 spiritual laws world, where the gospel was 4 basic concepts. The idea of, God loves me, I'm a sinner, Jesus died for me, I need to pray a prayer and accept him. And so the impact of the gospel was about forgiveness. That's what it was all about. Get forgiven. And then there was this 2-step process. Once you get forgiven, at some point, you kind of come to a point where someone starts challenging, you need to stop just being forgiven and start helping other people get forgiven. And unfortunately, that second step never really catches hold in the majority of Christians in the West. We get to just where we're forgiven. And that's unfortunately because of the way we were exposed to the gospel. God was a judge. And I need to get right with the judge. And if I get right with the judge and just keep my life within the lanes for the foreseeable future, then I'm good. And the reality is that that's so perverted in the sense. I mean, it's a part of the truth. It's not the whole truth.
Mm-hmm.
The whole truth is that we have a Father in heaven who wants a family. And at the core of who he is, he has a heart of generosity. The Father, the Son, the Spirit wanted to give away the relationship they had. And so as a result of that, they created angels first, and that didn't work really. And they created humans, and that didn't work, but it didn't cause, Father, Son, and Spirit to give up. They still pursued us and actually putting their relationship at risk to give us the opportunity to experience what it's like to live like they live, by the Son coming and dying in our place. And we see that fracture that happens, in the relationship there, and that moment that is so theologically threatening to us, to come to grips with the profound love that they have, and what the links that they will do to go to get us into their family. And as we begin to understand that, and then we begin to understand our own depravity, and how we just didn't violate God's laws. We broke his heart. We were his cherished children, made to live in his image, and we just flipped God off regularly in our lives when he loved us so dearly and sacrificed the most precious relationship that existed so that we could have a place in his family. I think when we re-engage the gospel, in terms of a Genesis to Revelation deal, we begin to understand what God is up to. And that begins to help me lean into the heart of my Father, and the reality of knowing that my Father so desperately wants me to be a part of his family. And therefore he wants me and my neighbor and my cross the street neighbor and the people I work with, and the refugees coming from Afghanistan and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, he has so desirous of bringing these people into his family so they can learn to live in his favorites, the best life that they could ever live that was designed for them. So I think, into that story is really, really important.
I mean, obviously going back to the scripture and reading and letting the Holy Spirit work in our hearts, the things that you're talking about are important. Are there other resources that you would recommend? Maybe books that help capture this idea?
Yeah, I think Floyd McClung's, book on the Father's heart is really good. I think the Return of the Prodigal by Henri Nouwen, and really sinking down into Luke 15, and especially in verses 21 through 24, when you see the Father who sees the Son from afar off, and you just sit in that idea that here is a son who had so abused his father, publicly shamed him, and yet this father is every day on the edge of this city looking and waiting for this idiot son of his to come home. And you begin to realize that Jesus is telling a story about his Father. Yeah. He's telling a story about the Father, our Father, and that kind of stuff. And so sitting in that and just realizing, how much the Father has given and wants us, and how much we've offended him, and how much he's forgiven us for, and he so desperately, wants us in his family. Those two things, Abba's Child by Brennan Manning it was really helpful to me, and Brennan Manning's the Prodigal Gospel. What's Brennan Manning's book?
Ragamuffin Gospel.
Ragamuffin Gospel. Thank you very much. Yeah, senior moment there. So,
awesome. Well, let's talk about the next one. It's partialism.
Well, I think it's. This gets me in a lot of trouble, and I hope that you can hear me. I'm a friend of all. Any strategy, anything that brings people into the family, I'm for. I'm not against anything, but I do find that Americans sort of operate on that kind of Ford principle. We have a better idea. As you see, the Ford Auto Company's motto, and there are at the strategy level people who think multiplicatively in movements, and then they have built tactics, methodologies to get there. And many of those methodologies were built out of a specific cultural context. So Ying Kai, Steve Smith, Curtis Sargent, and those guys have focused in on and has some great stuff for that. David Watson in a different part of the world, in a different space. They all get to movement. They all get to this point where you've got 100 churches, not groups now, 100 churches have multiplied to the fourth generation, representing maybe 1,000 groups. Some people add 4 streams in there. They all get, to that point. But they have focused in on their target audience. And oftentimes I find that Americans especially are very interested in kind of picking and choosing. It's like they come to the movement world and they see the movement tactics as a buffet. And I'm going to go to the buffet and I'm going to get the things I like, and I'm going to leave the things there that I don't like. And the reality is I've watched people be in trainings with people like David Watson and then go out of there and add, change, and alter the things. And I'm thinking, wait. You're talking to a guy God has used to do some amazing things. And why do you think you're smarter than he is? Understand your audience, understand what tactics might relate to your audience, and then lean into that and learn from the people who've been successful at it and stop trying to alter it. When you get good at it, when you start replicating and you get enough experience to see groups, respond groups and move into churches, at that point, then I might listen to you in terms of some of the things you're getting. But too many people take from here and there and here, and they fuse these things together. And so they say, well, why don't we have movements in North America? It's because you didn't listen to the people who have movements in the first place.
Yeah.
Listen. I wish Steve Smith was still with us. A brilliant guy. What a brother. He and I are both Baylor grads, and so Sikkim Bears, national champions this past year. I had to mention that. Sorry. But a brilliant guy, and Ying now lives in Austin, and Curtis is here with Zume and that kind of stuff. And new generations, kind of moving out of the David Watson stream with the habits training and stuff like that. You got to understand your audience and pick the tactics that work in your audience. Don't pick the tactics that you like or that are comfortable to you or that kind of stuff. Your audience determines your tactics, not you. And so fusion, people just start picking and choosing off the buffet table and mix and match what they want. And, it's kind of like a suicide drink at Quick Trip or something, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, so.
With that in mind, can you speak a little bit to the irreducible minimum idea? I know that when we developed the habits of a multiplying disciple, we basically talked to movement leaders all over the world and came up with irreducible minimum. And I wondered if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Sure. That irreducible minimum, comes out of, I got it from a book called Darwin's Black Box, where Michael Behe, a biochemist from Lehigh University, uses it to talk about, the evolutionary process and how at some point, like with sight, you have to have a certain irreducible minimum of things before sight will work. And so his point is, as he's arguing against evolution, is that all these things have to evolve at the same time, and they have to hit at the right point. They have to all be mutations at the right point to be together. And then voila, you've got sight. Well, I think the same thing happens, we've discovered, David, as our team looked around the world and realized that there are some irreducible minimums. And we kind of focus those down, on the heart of God. The idea of having a submissive, attitude toward our Father in such a way that we lean into a relationship with him, that it drenches us and our world in prayer. We learn to engage, with the non-believing world. We find persons of peace in that non-believing world. We invite them into a discovery, so they learn to discover what God is saying about life and obey it and share it. And then as they begin to embrace the teachings of Jesus and the cross, and they form into assemblies or churches, and those churches then become a platform for multiplication that takes place. And so it's a lot like a mousetrap. I was just cleaning out my pantry yesterday, looking for some poison to feed to the moles that are tearing up my yard right now. And I found my bag of mouse traps. I don't have mice anymore, or at least not at this point in time of the year. But a mouse trap has certain irreducible minimum pieces. There's that platform, there's the spring, there's the wire that goes around, there's the trigger and the tongue, there's the hook that hooks to the trigger and that kind of stuff. And so if all of those aren't there, the mousetrap doesn't work. It just pieces parts and it's just useless. But when they're all there together, then it works very effectively. If you know how to bait it, and it captures those mice and sends them on to a better world. So I think in the movement world, we've discovered, from our friends and our mentors in the new generations world, we've discovered that there are certain irreducible minimums. They all must be there. If they're not there, you can't just go out and start a bunch of discovery groups and think that, okay, I got a bunch of discovery groups. And many churches have turned their entire group system into discovery groups, thinking they're going to start movement. And that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Thanks, Roy. We're going to get to some questions here because we've had a few really good ones come in. First, I just want to say that I was at Roy's house last week, and your house sounds like a really rough place to be a critter based on what you said about mice and pigeons and such. So, yeah, I want to combine two really good questions because they're asking a different version of the same thing. So I'm going to ask them both together and you answer as you see fit. The first one says, I find that as a pastor, there is a quote unquote tug of war between seeking to live as Jesus did and still operating in the context of what church is like now. What practices have you adopted to stay on track in the midst of pioneering something new? And then let me go ahead and ask this other question. They said, Roy has a helpful book out about hybrid church. Any advice for those leading an established church but feel called to rethink how we do church? Beyond working with the fringe people, does Roy have advice on the balancing of the gatherings, traditional format versus DMM? So yeah, maybe just talk about some ways that you've experimented at Shoal Creek, maybe give some advice on what to do, not to do, all that kind of stuff. And you've touched on some of that already, but maybe go into some real practical detail if you're willing.
Sure. From a personal level, I just have ripped titles out. I don't allow people to refer to me as pastor. I believe that Jesus kind of spoke to that in Matthew's gospel about, don't call yourself, don't call anyone father, that kind of stuff. I talk about that in Spent Matches. So we try to create a level playing field in the way we refer to people, the way we act. I have always, from very early on, taken people with me. One of our staff members, who's now a staff member, wasn't then, was just a computer programmer. He was facilitating a small group, and some members of his small group, no, they weren't even in a small group at that point. So some people called, frantic call, police are here, can you come? And this domestic disturbance issue and stuff. And so I called him and I said, hey man, what are you doing? And he says, well, I'm just sitting here watching TV. I said, I'll pick you up in 5 minutes. And so I drove by his house, picked him up, and drug him into probably one of the worst nightmares he'd ever been into. A couple that were just having us knockdown, drag out, screaming and yelling and that kind of stuff. And so, he got a chance to be there with me in the midst of this. And that kind of attitude is always pervade, always pushing people into things that, personally, I didn't feel qualified to go into that situation. He asked me on the way back, he said, how did you know what to do? And I said, I had no idea what I was doing. I was making it up as I went. I said, that's what you call trusting the Spirit. You know, you believe that the Spirit of God is in this moment, and you just lean into the Spirit in that. And so I've always drugged people into those moments and pushed them, you know, beyond what they feel like they're qualified for. Had an incredible confidence that the Spirit of God and the power of the Word and a faithful person could be there. I mean, personally, I've also tried to involve myself in a lot of like social stuff in the city. Involved in a Rotary Club, for instance. I don't particularly like going. It's Friday morning at breakfast, and it's oftentimes useless from a content standpoint, but the relational thing is huge. Had an opportunity to take one of my Rotarian friends with me to South Africa. He had an interest in Africa. I had an incredible conversation one night sitting around in a beautiful space in South Africa in Jeffreys Bay, or in Port St. John, smoking a cigar and just really scraping the Milky Way of God and Jesus and that kind of stuff. And I had a chance to see Steve, you know, embrace the cross and come to faith as a result of that. So I have to get in the way of non-believers because I, as a natural part of my own life, being a pastor of a church, or being I said that word, didn't I? Being a spiritual leader in a church, you know, I don't run across that many non-believers often, you know. So I have to put myself, you know, in their place. I've restricted my language, even though David says I use big words and stuff. I restrict my language. I don't think people need to have to define my jargon in a sense. And so when I say Gospels, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So I say the first 4 books in the second half of the Bible. And so I have ruthlessly restricted my language to try to make it normal for people. So that they could understand what I'm talking about and what I'm getting to. You know, we focus on, you know, loving where you live here at Shoal Creek, and help people understand that there are 4 basic arenas where we think God might use you: where you live, work, or play. And so your circle of accountability, where is it that you are going to be responsible for lostness? Draw a circle on a map or around a particular group of people and say, I'm going to be responsible for lostness in that area. And that starts me praying. That starts me engaging. That starts me able to find persons of peace. And so the whole process starts when you actually put a pin in the map or around a particular, you know, group of people or you know, subset of people that exist in your area. So I don't know.
That's all super helpful, and it flows right into. Let's do 2 rapid fire, and then we need to give some people on this call some instructions about some potential next steps. So here's last 2 questions. I'll ask them together, and you answer them in whatever order you'd like. They're short. One of them is, how has your definition of church changed over the years? And then I'll remind you of the second one if you forget. But the other one is, when people, I love this question, by the way, when people ask what you do for a living and where you work, how do you respond?
Yeah.
So definition of church, and how do you respond to that question?
So my definition of church really hasn't changed that much, as it was part of what allowed me to lean into the whole movement world so quickly. I was early on involved with a guy named Gene Getz, who wrote a book called Sharpening the Focus of the Church. Gene is one of the most biblical textual people I'd ever met in my life. And so he just got his fingerprints on the Bible and just sort of churned that truth up. And so early on, I had this idea that when you see something, to call it a ecclesia, it had to have a vital relationship with God through his word, a vital relationship with fellow followers of Jesus, and a vital relationship with the world on mission with God. So those 3 things were there. And so that just etched in my mind, that idea. So if you pull out, for instance, Brian Sanders' book, Microchurch, you see the same 3 things. You know, you see Brian talking about worship, fellowship, and mission. You know, and so those kinds of things, you know, were really on my mind for a long time. And so when I ran into David Watson, David Rudrick, the New Generations crowd, the Denver City team. It just sort of everything. It was clicking and really, going on with me. When people ask me, when I say I play a lot of golf, and I oftentimes play by myself, so I pick up people, and invariably in the third or fourth hole, say, "What do you do? Where do you work?" and that kind of stuff. So I say I'm a spiritual literacy catalyst.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Unpack that for us.
Yeah. So and usually I get some kind of not repeatable here phrase that comes. What is that? And so I said, well, basically, I help people learn to read the Bible for themselves and discover what God has to say about life. And now there are some people that look at me and go, "Oh, you're a pastor, aren't you?" I say, well, I don't like to call myself that, but I do work I work with a group of people, a fellowship of people who really want to make sure that everyone has a Jesus option in their life. And our whole, goal is to make Jesus accessible to everyone. So that's kind of my, my shtick in that sense. And it creates lots of interesting conversation for people. They just like, that's unusual and stuff. And so, usually the round of golf is over and it doesn't go far, but when we can pick it back up, things happen, so.
So the spiritual literacy catalyst.
Yeah. If you ever get for me, you'll see that on the bottom. That's my title. So.
Yeah, I might be stealing that one, man. Awesome. Good stuff, David. I think we need to get into this form and give some folks some instructions. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. Does that sound good, David?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, let's. So guys, this is really important. Then we're going to get Roy, I think, here in a minute to pray over us if he's willing. Or,
sure.
But we really want you to have some options for next steps, and so, both in the chat box here in just a second, and then also with a follow-up email that each of you will be getting, there is a form to fill out, and we would just love for you to do so. And it'll be pretty obvious filling it out what you need to do, but there are 5 ways that you can get involved at the end of that form, and you can check off any boxes that apply. So one of them would be helping to reach unreached people groups. So we have quite a few folks that are involved in doing that. And if you or your church is interested, we'd love to get you more information about what that could look like. David, you want to talk real quick about the upcoming DMM training? Because that's the second way people can get involved.
We've had hundreds of people go through the habits of a multiplying discipleship training. And it's the one that Roy was referring to. And we have a course coming up on September 13th at 9:00 Central Time. And so we'll be sending out the way that you can register for that. You do need to register ahead of time.
That's in the chat box. That's in the chat box right now also.
Okay.
By the way. Yep.
Awesome.
All right. Good deal. And that's, again, September 13th. That's in the chat box. The third way, guys, if you have been through this habits training that David is referring to, then we would love for you to go to kind of a phase 2 of that, which is a coaching cohort, a DMM coaching cohort. Lots of you have also gone through that. Lots of you still have not. We feel like that's such an essential next step. So we offer coaching. David, you want to talk about the fourth thing, which is resources?
As Roy mentioned, we really need to see a movement of prayer happening in our cities and neighborhoods. And so we want to resource people through what we call movement prayer, but also to see movement prayer hubs. These are groups that meet over a Zoom, 30-minute Zoom, praying for particular cities, regions, and people groups. We'd like to see hundreds of those throughout North America. And so if you want more information about just movement prayer or how you can join one of these hubs or start one, just check that box.
Very important. And then finally, we are right now about to put we've already put the training link in the chat. So I think we're also going to have that form coming in the chat. And again, you will get that via email. So there's 4 ways to respond on that. All right, we're
Yeah.
going to wrap up here. David, you want to kind of close us out? And
Yeah, I mean, I just want to thank everyone again for being a part of these webinars. We hope to have another one coming up in the near future, and we'll let you know about that. And you can go ahead and register for that. But we first of all, we want to say thank you to Roy again. If you haven't read Spent Matches, I would say get a copy of it. I think it will be tremendously helpful for you as you're beginning to, especially plant DMM within an existing church. You know, how do you do that? But Roy, yeah, would you pray a prayer for all of us that are on this webinar, and then we'll close with that.
I'd love to. Father, I see so many names of so many friends out there in the attendance list. I just thank you for a chance to be with them. So many stories I love to hear of what you're doing in their lives. I pray, Father, that you would just allow the Spirit to be the spirit of consolation, the spirit of encouragement to them. We are pushing a ball up a hill, a very big ball up a hill against not just Satan and the powers of darkness in this world, but against tradition. And so we ask, Father, that you would just encourage us. We believe that we are tasting a bit of your heart, that you long for your not yet sons and daughters to be a part of your family. And we want to be a part of that because that's what you've called us to. Help us to get ourselves out of the way, Father. Help us to not depend on human things like movement tactics and think that this can happen if we just bear down, but help us to lean into you, to experience your love, to be profoundly impacted by your heart, the heart that you had for us, even when we were running away from you. We were like Abraham. We were an enemy of yours, and you made us your friend. And so we thank you for that. And Father, I pray for success. I pray that we would see men and women start following you and learn how to move into their social networks and see the gospel move with them, and see their friends and their families, their workmates, to see their gym mates, their teammates, to see the people that attend classes with them begin to do the same thing. Father, I pray that you would give us a vision for a new kind of gospel. Many of us have been reared. Many of us cut our spiritual teeth on a gospel of forgiveness. And we need a gospel of kingdom. We need a royal gospel. We need to understand, Father, that you came not just to forgive us, but you came to bring heaven to earth. You came to involve us in bringing other men and women into your favor, and for them to learn the beauty of what it's like to live in this sin-stained world in the favor of a Father who so desperately loves them. So Father, just to impassion us for our space. I pray that everyone listening right now, Father, whether they're live or whether it's later on, that we would have the courage to create a circle of accountability, that we would pull out a map, draw a circle around a particular area, and begin to believe that you've called us to make it hard for people in that circle to go to hell, that you desire sons and daughters from that circle, that they're out there, you're working in their lives, and we can join you in the process of finding them and seeing them experience your faith. Father, give us the courage to not only believe it, but to act on it. I thank you for these folks, Father. Thank you for the life that they've chosen to live. And I pray that you just continually encourage them Father, they're doing a good thing. They're leaning hard into your kingdom. And so bless their efforts, make them successful, Father. Give them moments where they can see what they dream of so that they can continue. Father, I thank you for this hour we spent together. Thank you for your willingness to invest in my life, the men and women who have made incredible sacrifices that allow me to be here and to do what I do. And I'm just grateful for that, Father. And thank you for these men and women too. And I know that they have the same. They have people who've given them a lot. And so we trust, Father, that this week, this month, and this year, that we'll see tremendous gains for your kingdom in our life. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for his life, for his death and resurrection. It's because of him and through him and that we come and we can do all of this. So we ask this in Jesus' name today, Father. Amen.